Greetings, Uncle Travelling Matt here, day 3 of my Israel and Jordan trip, and I am in Petra. So last night, after I signed off from my latch, I crossed over the border to Jordan, and then took a taxi actually all the way up from the border to here. They were saying there were no buses. I didn't actually believe them, although to be fair, I didn't see any on the road, so they may have been telling the truth. But I got a good deal, and I thought it would be a good idea to chat to someone, which it was. I had a very nice driver called Habsa, and we chatted away, and the scenery was pretty amazing, and I would have missed a lot of that on a bus. So yeah, I don't regret that at all. I'm staying in that place over there, the Petra cabin. It's actually a capsule hotel. I stayed in those first of all in Japan. I quite like the concept because I don't really care if I have a big room, but I do want my own private space, and that they do provide for you. So yeah, that's that. I'm of course going to go and visit the old city of Petra today. This is the main reason for my visit. This is why I've come here. And although I want to see it because it's very beautiful, I want to see where they filmed Indiana Jones and all that kind of stuff, I actually have an additional reason for wanting to go to Petra, and that is because I'm very interested in new examinations of the early history of Islam. And what's happened since the 80s, really, it is quite a recent phenomenon, is they've actually started to look at early Islam in an historical light, which they've never done before. They did it with Christianity and Judaism in the early 19th century, early to mid 19th century and 20th century. But they never really did it for Islam. They just accepted the whole traditional narrative. And when you look at the traditional narrative of Islam, there are actually a lot of holes and inconsistencies with it. So, for example, the Quran is obviously written in a place where there's agriculture, but there's no agriculture in Mecca. There's a stream that's meant to run across the valley from in Mecca, and there isn't one. And various other, textual and clues from coinage and that. And so there seems to be a growing scholarly consensus that perhaps Mecca, and because it's not called Mecca in the Quran, it's called Bakka, wasn't where Mecca is today. And nobody knows where it was, but the most commonly held position is that it could have been Petra, because Petra fits the geographical markers, about the stream running across the valley. It was in an agricultural area at the time, things like that. But also, more importantly, because the qiblas of every early mosque point to Petra. Now, the Muslims do have a tradition that the qiblas used to point to Jerusalem, and then they were moved in the life of the Prophet, but actually work by a chap called Dan Gibson. It shows that there are no qiblas that ever pointed to Jerusalem, but all the early ones pointed to Petra, and they only started to be aligned to Mecca about 150, 200 years after I can't remember after the Prophet's death. I've got the dates in my bag. So, what I could actually be doing today is going to the place where the second largest religion in the world was founded, which is pretty amazing if you think about it. And even more amazing since the Saudis won't let me into Mecca. So, yeah, anyway, that's that. So, anyway, I'm off now to Petra. So, I'm now walking into Petra, and on the hillsides there, you can see the evidence of the terracing that the Nabatean did for their fields. That's how they did their agriculture. And here we are. An incredible landscape. So the square rocks in front, that's what they call a jinn rock, or a jinn stone, and the theory is that they mark the edge of the sanctuary, the holy area in which violence was not permitted. And of course, this is another one of the bits of evidence that suggests that here may be the real Bakka and not Mecca, because there are no evidence, there's been no archaeological evidence of these sanctuary markers, even though they're mentioned in the Quran in Mecca, but they're very clearly here. Pretty cool. So this is the Obelisk tomb, and it's in a, as you can see, a rather Egyptian style. And what this reminds me of is the Obelisk temple that I went to in Byblos in Lebanon last year, which was again in a very Egyptian style, even though it's far away from what we now regard to be Egypt. And of course their cultural influence spread a long way. And here's more evidence of it. It seems, from what it was saying in the museum, that the Nabateans went from having very geometrically based monuments, so like the gym blocks, like those obelisks, towards more human-looking gods and monuments when they came in contact with the Greeks and the Romans more, which I think is quite interesting. So I've now entered into the Sikh, which is the stream bed, or it's dry now obviously, that ran across the main valley, and this is the famous way to enter Petra. I think this here is evidence of the early watercourse.
Excuse me, you want to go on the donkey?
I must admit, the 19th century explorers that came down here and saw it for the first time, obviously aside from the bend in centuries, must have been pretty amazing. And there it is, the Treasury, the most famous monument in Petra. Wow. So the Treasury is the most famous of all the monuments. It's actually quite a late one, about 50 to 100, I think, either BC, I think it is. So it's not one of the earliest ones. Interestingly enough, it's called the Treasury because there was a legend that the pharaoh hid a treasure in that urn at the top. It isn't it? It's a tomb. And there seems to be a lot of tombs around here. And also underneath, back there, there's two more tombs, royal tombs, that they found in 2004. That they didn't even know were there before. It's pretty amazing stuff. All carved out of a single piece of stone. Wow. So we're now getting towards the main part of the city. There's these incredible tombs here ranging from 200 BC to 200 AD. You can see the classical influence, but also the earlier, very kind of blocky buildings with these stepped elements on the top, and then they suggest they're much earlier. Going back to the kind of is this Bakka thesis, what strikes me is how similar all these kind of structures look to the Kaaba. Obviously there were Kaaba everywhere. Look, there's another early one. That's cracking. There were lots of Kaaba all over Arabia. But what this does tell you is it was part of the same tradition. Whether or not it was the actual place or not is another matter, but it was part of the same tradition. But the sheer amount of tombs here and religious sites suggests that this was a place of some religious importance. And of course, Petra was known as far back, as far away as China. It was, unlike Mecca, on the major trading routes, and it was known as a pilgrimage centre. And there's lots of graffiti from through the ages to testify to that. Well, we're now getting into the heart of the city itself. So I'm now in the heart of the old city, and I suppose this would have been houses and shops, but on the hillside above are all the tombs. Absolutely unbelievable. So we're now in the very heart of the old city. I think this was called the Colonnaded Street, and on both sides where all the kind of rubble is now, I'm guessing that's where most of the people live, there are city walls beyond this. The city walls are another factor which Gibson argues that this is Mecca and Mecca isn't, because Mecca hasn't got any city walls. All the archaeological explorations haven't found any, and there are here. But what we're going to go and have a look at next, as we walk along the main street of ancient Petra, is the main temple. And I guess if you were going to look for a location for the original Kaaba, it would be there. So I am now in the old Great Temple complex. Across the valley, so that in the main street of the city ran below, but across the valley is what they call the Winged Lion Temple, which is another one of the main temples. It faced this, and then there's the outer courtyard, and then this is the inner bit. And I guess if there is a candidate for the location of the original holy sanctuary, then this is it. Is it? I mean, is this the place where Muhammad got rid of all the idols? I don't know. I mean, there's lots of evidence in its favour. Evidence against is that if the copy that was made in Mecca later, and I can explain kind of how that may have come about, is a copy of this, well, the layout's a bit different. Like, where would a Kaaba have been? I mean, I suppose the obvious place is in that courtyard there, but that's just the outer courtyard. This is the main bit, and it's not something you can circulate. So there's a piece of evidence that suggests that this isn't it. Of course, the problem is, if this isn't, where is? Because people, I mean, I'll be honest, I'm not really one who believes in conspiracy theories and, mad, oh, well, maybe it's this or maybe it's that, and, maybe there was a lost city of Atlantis and all that kind of stuff. But the problem is, with the existing Mecca, the evidence isn't there. So no matter where it was, and there was somebody who lived, and whether his name was Muhammad or that may have just been a title, because it means, I think the trustworthy one. I think, as my memory playing tricks on me if I'm wrong, but wherever he was, it probably wasn't there, because nothing fits. The pieces will not fit in that jigsaw there. So where was it? And this is only one of the potential locations, but it is the most likely. And if you're going to go for the most likely spot within the most likely city, then this temple is it. But that does still raise lots of other questions. It's quite exciting. I think we're actually at a really exciting time archaeologically, that for the first time in history, really, these ancient myths are being questioned, and we've got the technology and we've got the know-how, stuff like the internet, so we can look at aerial photography very easily for the first time in history, to actually work out what the truth is. And it could be here, in the Great Temple. Of course, the Great Temple is not the only candidate for the Holy Sanctuary, and we're now in another, which is only a few metres away from it. And there we are, a gentleman praying up there. As if this were the original sanctuary. There's a degree of irony in that, but never mind. So yeah, this is another one. This is the Temple of Dushara, who was the principal goddess of Petra, and this is that gateway there behind me. It marks the entrance to her sanctuary. And it is said that this was the holiest temple, despite the fact that the other one was the Great Temple. So maybe this is it. Who knows? I mean, what is very clear is that it was a very, very large religious complex with a lot going on in terms of faith. And of course, it was polytheistic, but some gods were seen as more than others. And there was also a history of monotheism in the area we're going to go to. Well, there's a Byzantine church over there, and going to go to a building they call the Monastery, because that later became a Christian chapel. It wasn't originally. So you can kind of see how someone brought up in that kind of real swirling morass of faith would have seen that, you know, there was all these different gods. That was somehow wrong because they'd come into contact with Jews and Christians, so they knew that was wrong. But then what was right? And you go back to the original, you go back to the oldest, the simplest of monuments, and you think, well, this was it, and we've gone away from the original truth, and let's get back to the original truth. And Islam, if nothing else, is a religion about getting back to the origins. People say that when you convert to Islam, you revert because you're going back to the original faith. Not a lot of historical proof for that, but I mean, there's the Temple of Dushara. Could that be it? Wow, pretty amazing. So I got up to the top. I'm now at this building here, which is called the Monastery. It is another of the tomb buildings, but it was later used by Christians as a chapel, hence the name. I thought while I'm here I should really give a bit of context as to the whole is this Mecca thing that I've been talking about, because I'm guessing it does sound like a bit of a crazy idea. So why do I think that, or more importantly, why do a lot of academics think that? Well, in the Quran, what's mentioned is the forbidden gathering place, Al-Haram, and the city is referred to as the mother of all cities, and it's said to be on a major trade route. And yet, prior to 740, Mecca appears on no maps. It's not mentioned by the Romans, the Persians, anyone. The only two references, there's a vague reference to a temple somewhere near the Arabian Sea, and I think that's on Ptolemy's map. And Makora is mentioned somewhere, but that could be somewhere else. And actually the place it is on the map is nowhere near where Mecca is anyway. It certainly wasn't the mother of all cities. All archaeological excavations have revealed, well, virtually nothing. It wasn't on a major trading route. The other thing is the Quran is written for an audience that obviously know a bit about monotheism, and the feeling you get is that this is people who understand monotheism but have been infected by polytheism, and the writer, be it God or a prophet who thinks it's God talking to him, is someone who thinks that people should go back to the original, and the original was this pure monotheism, and I think that's very apparent in Islam today. So, Christianity is basically on the right path, but things like the Trinity and that get in the way. And of course, at the time, the Trinity wasn't universally accepted by Christians as it pretty much is now. With regard to the Qiblas of the mosques, the earliest mosques that exist, you've got ones from 623, the Mosque of the Two Qiblas, Guangzhou Mosque 627. They all face towards Petra. As far as the Wasid Mosque in Iraq, that's 706. So this is, well after the death of the Prophet, who died in 570. Surah 2 of the Quran does talk about turning from Jerusalem to the Masjid al-Haram, the forbidden gathering place, but because it never says that where that is. And what this could be is that there's this vague memory that people used to pray to a different place. The question is, why would they move from Petra to Mecca? And what seems to have been the case is it happens in the time of a chap called Ibn Zubayr. He was the governor of Bakka, which, okay, if we assume that's Petra now, for argument's sake, what happened is he had a war with the Umayyads in Damascus, who were the ruling dynasty at the time, and they laid siege to Bakka, and then had to be called off because the Umayyad Caliph died, and then came back later. And in the year that they laid siege, there is evidence that there was a siege at Petra, and it talks about them using large cannonballs. There is evidence of these cannonballs. Yeah. What it's thought is, and he also says that Ibn Zubayr destroyed the Kaaba and then later rebuilt it, which is like, well, why would you do that? And what it's thought, he might have thought he was going to lose the siege. He probably would have done, and so he destroys the Kaaba to take away the black stone, which is the most sacred artifact. And then, of course, what he does is he moves it to a safe place, which he also governs, several thousand miles in South Mecca, and then rebuilds it with the black stone in there. I mean, if you look at the legends, the things that it was the first building, in history, it was the house that Abraham built, well, Adam built, then Abraham rebuilt. If he's in this city, and there are these very revered and very sacred places, then I think those kind of myths could perpetuate. And that's why I'm interested in having gone to Beersheba, because of course Beersheba is where the Bible says the Hagar story, which is so central to Islam, took place. It's not far. As the crow flies from here, it's not far away at all. And we're actually in the area where all this stuff happens. So, for example, one of them says that, you pass by the pillar of Lot's wife. That's a few miles over there, bottom of the Dead Sea. So the people from here would pass by there every day. But the people from Mecca, like 1,000 miles away, they wouldn't. They wouldn't even know about it. We're in early days yet, and, to me, you follow the evidence, and at the moment the evidence looks like it's pointing here. It certainly isn't pointing in the accepted location, but who knows? And the exciting thing is there's more stuff that can be discovered. But in the meantime, I suppose maybe, possibly I can say that, I've been to the place where Islam was founded, which is pretty amazing. And for somebody who likes a bit of religious tourism, yeah, that's worth making the effort. In the meantime, I'm going to relax after the big climb, look at this monastery, and enjoy my shisha vibe. Keep travelling.
Jesus, obrigada. Não botar mais escada. Obrigada.
on top of the world. Over there is Israel. That might be the Dead Sea down there. The monastery, main city of Petra, Wadi Musa. So that wadi leads down to the Al Siach spring. Could that be the original Zamzam? Seems to be the holy spring of Petra, so maybe. So this is all that remains of the Temple of the Winged Lions. Not a lot. I believe it was destroyed in an earthquake in, I think it was 330s, so before the kind of period that I've been looking at particularly. Over there is the Great Temple that we looked at earlier, and there is the Temple of the goddess Jashara, which interestingly, you know, I had a look at the Gilbert stuff, and this is the one he thinks was probably the Kaaba, because it has a precinct and it talks about a sacred enclosure, and of course there's the gate marking the entrance to it, and a precinct, and there is a big kind of stone block in the middle. I don't know what that was. There's no signage to say, but anyway, here we are right in the heart of Petra. Absolutely stunning. Here are the remains of a Byzantine church in Petra. Obviously Christianity came later, but there's this one, and then down there under the cover I believe that's the better one. See if it's open still. And the church is open, so I'm now in the outer courtyard. We'll go into the holy sanctuary itself, and this is kept under cover because of the mosaics. So we have these here, which are pretty good. Don't know how old those are, whether they're rebuilt, but these are the real treasure. There's the altar, and man,